A pleasant and a very good Thursday. Welcome to September 17th, 2020. A small change is coming, but it's enough of a change to help out with the smoke and the haze in the region. And it's also a change that is going to start a chain of events that will lead to other changes down the road. We'll talk about that here in a minute. We'll give you an update on the smoke. Our front arrives late Friday into Saturday. Next week, for the most part, looks pretty quiet. We got a little front coming in Tuesday and Wednesday, but we'll have another week where there really won't be much going on. Next bigger change is on tap for next weekend. The magnitude of the change is something we've got to figure out, but it certainly does look like there'll be some type of frontal system next weekend coming our way. We're going to talk a bit more about solar cycles and El Nino and La Nina. We talked a little yesterday about that. I'm going to give you more detail on why we need to pay more attention to these solar cycles with our weather and climate. First of all, here's the latest smoke plume update. It looks just like yesterday, coast-to-coast smoke. And it's going to continue to be around for probably 2.5 days around here for Wyoming, Colorado, Montana. This region right here where we concentrate the podcast on, we're going to have this smoke and haze hang on for a little bit longer. But the weather pattern is going to change. You see this little swirl out here? This is because there's a low here that's been stalled, but it's finally beginning showing signs of moving. We'll show you that here in a minute. So here's the upper level low. It's been in that same spot for the last 3 days, just kind of teasing the Pacific Northwest, but it's finally going to get a nudge from this guy. We call this a kicker. This low, once it gets a certain distance to this low, will make this one move. It's called Henry's rule in meteorology. And so once this gets kicked out, once the low gets close enough to it, it will finally move. And that's going to happen this weekend. There we go. We've got the low by Saturday morning over Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. We're going to finally see it's going to start tonight. Tonight and Friday, bringing rain to those areas there. As the front heads east, it's going to go due east. It's not going to be a digger, but translate pretty quickly west to east across the area. By Sunday morning, you can see it's going across the northern Rockies, into the Dakotas, and kind of minoring out a little bit. There's another tropical situation developing down in the Gulf of Mexico, believe it or not. We could see some big rains there. May not turn into a hurricane, but could end up being a tropical depression or tropical storm late in the weekend and early next week, threatening the Gulf Coast with more rain. As we get beyond that time frame, this is by next Tuesday night and Wednesday. High pressure starts to build along the west coast again. There's that low down there off of Texas. See this little ripple right here? This is a weak cool front coming in from the northwest that'll bring maybe a couple of chances late Tuesday and Wednesday, but it's really not much of a system. But notice this low up here in the Gulf of Alaska. Instead of stalling out like the last one did, it gets a push. So this is by next weekend. This is a pretty healthy looking cold front coming in by next weekend, so that would likely produce cooler temperatures and a fairly good chance of showers again. And that low, this guy right here, will have to move through here, so they're going to get more rain in Washington and Oregon. So the prospects for our smoke situation get a much, much better by Saturday afternoon into Sunday. With this front coming in, this is by Saturday morning, there's still going to be smoke out ahead of it. So today, Friday, and Saturday, still smoky, but the wind on Saturday picks up enough to disperse it. But by Sunday and into Monday and Tuesday of next week, we should see the smoke maybe not go away completely, but thin out considerably. And if this next front comes through, enough rain will have fallen here over the next 7 to 10 days to really put a damper on the fires. And look at that. So you can see Washington and Oregon's mountain ranges are going to get some really good amounts of moisture over the next 10 days. Now, you get east of the Cascades, they get that rain shadow, but along and west of the divide there's going to be some good rain here over the next 10 days, really helping out. California is a different story. California is dry in September. You just don't get rain in September down there, and they're only going to see some showers over the high Sierras. That'll be all. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about solar cycles and the way our weather patterns react. This is a graphic I put together for a presentation back in the fall of 2019. There's a lot going on in this graph, so I'm going to take a little bit of time here to show you a couple of things. First of all, these peaks and valleys you see are the solar cycles, the most recent ones. So if you look at the solar cycles, this would be solar cycle 23, 22, and 21. So 21, 22, 23. So if you go back to the late 80s and early 90s, we had a very, very active solar cycle. It was very strong, as you can see there. The next solar cycle was a little weaker. The next solar cycle is a little weaker, and here we are bottoming out, and the prediction of the next solar cycle is about like that. So the trend of our solar cycles has been going down. That is a well-established fact. So the amplitude trend is going down. That means more cosmic rays and potentially more cloud cover over a longer period of time, with this amplitude of solar cycle activity decreasing. So that trend is continuing. That is a major factor in long-term climate trends. Now, you may not want to believe that or even believe me, but I'll tell you, we continue to really disregard solar activity with weather and climate in the media. We tend to disregard it in the science. People are putting more science into it, but it has more and more of a factor. At least that's my opinion. Take my opinion for what it's worth. But it's something that is worthy of more study, especially when you take a look at solar activity historically over the last 500 or 600 years and look what has happened with trends in climate. Now, let's take a look at what happens with La Nina and El Ninos. Another very interesting trend when you look at these solar cycles is you tend to have La Ninas and El Ninos at certain sections of your peaks and valleys with solar activity. What I want you to notice is a pattern, and a lot of weather forecasting is recognizing patterns. Notice that right after a strong peak in the solar cycle, you have an El Nino. Okay? And there's good reason for that. There's always a delay. So when there's a peak or a valley in solar activity, there is a lag in change in terms of sea surface temperatures and conditions. So you would expect the warmest sea surface temperatures right after the peak of solar activity. And that's exactly what you see. Now, each of these El Ninos I'm showing are of different strength and magnitude, but we tend to see the strongest El Ninos right after the peak in solar activity, right there. You tend to see weaker El Ninos right as you start to go out of a solar minimum, right there. Also note, you get La Ninas as you bottom out of a solar cycle. As you reach the bottom, you tend to have weak El Ninos as you start to reverse and get into a more active pattern, segues back to La Ninas again. And then you see I have La Nina here in purple with a question mark. Well, this is something we did in the fall of 2019, where you were able to use the solar cycles to make your prediction of La Ninas and El Ninos regardless of all the computer models we use. Well, guess what's happened? We're developing into a moderate to strong La Nina at the bottom of our current solar cycle. Go back in history and you find them there again. And then we could easily predict that probably 2 years from now, we're going to have an El Nino as you start to bottom out of the solar cycle and climb up again. Then after we go through this next solar cycle that looks like this, the next strongest El Nino will be right there. Now, is it a perfect match? No, but it's very compelling because when you go back and look at the El Nino and La Nina cycles, there's some other things going on that may not be solar related, but solar activity is more of a factor than we're led to believe. So we'll talk about this in future podcasts. In the meantime, let's hope we can clear out the smoke by the weekend.